The debt was $43. That was the price they put on her. The price her father owed to a man named Decker, and when her father couldn't pay it, they took her instead. She didn't fight them. By the time they came for her, Willa had stopped fighting most things. Fighting was for people who still believed the world might bend in their favor. She had stopped believing that somewhere around the time her mother died, and her father started spending every night at the bottom of a whiskey bottle. So when two men from Decker's outfit showed up at the door of their cabin outside Cutter's Creek, Montana, in the last week of October, she let them load her into the back of a wagon. Her father watched from the porch. He didn't say a word. She didn't look back. They took her to a place called Hargrove's, which called itself a trading post, but was really just a low building full of men who bought things they shouldn't. Decker wasn't there when they arrived. He was expected by nightfall, they told her. In the meantime, she was to wait in the back room. She sat on a crate and counted the knotholes in the wall. There were 11. She counted them twice to be sure. That was where Emmett found her. He wasn't looking for her specifically. He came into Hargrove's for flour and lamp oil, and maybe a new blade, if the price was right. The same things he came in for every few weeks, when his supplies ran low, and the weather still allowed him to make the trip down from the high country. He was a man who didn't linger in town, and he didn't enjoy the company of men who did. He left. He got what he needed, and he left, but Hargrove's back door was propped open against the unseasonable warmth of that afternoon, and Emmett happened to glance through it as he passed, and he saw a girl sitting on a crate with her wrists wrapped in rope, and her eyes fixed on the wall like she was counting something. He stopped. He stood there for a long moment. A man came out of the back room and told him to keep moving. Nothing to see. Emmett looked at the man. He was not a small man, Emmett. He was the kind of big that comes from 20 years of cutting wood alone and carrying everything you own on your back. The man from the back room stepped aside. Emmett asked what was owed on her. The answer was $43, which was almost exactly what he had in his coat pocket, after selling 2 beaver pelts and a wolf skin that morning. He'd been planning to use it for flour and lamp oil and a new blade. He stood there, doing the arithmetic that wasn't really arithmetic at all, because some things you calculate with something other than numbers. Then he reached into his pocket. Willa heard the coins hit the counter. She heard a brief conversation she couldn't make out. Then a man she had never seen before appeared in the doorway of the back room. He was somewhere past 40, broad-shouldered, with dark hair going grey at the temples and a beard that had grown without much attention. He looked at her the way you look at something that confuses you, but that you've already committed to dealing with. "Can you ride?" he asked. She looked at his hands. They were large and scarred, and he was already holding a belt knife, which he used to cut the rope around her wrists without ceremony or comment. "Yes," she said. "Then come on." That was all. No explanation, no reassurance, no speech about what he intended or what she owed him or what any of this meant. He walked out and she followed because the only alternative was to stay, and staying wasn't something she was willing to do. His horse was a grey roan, named for nothing she ever heard him call it. He rode and she sat behind him, and they went north out of Cutter's Creek into country that got steeper and colder with every mile. The sky was clear when they started. By the time the trail turned to switchbacks, there were clouds coming in from the northwest that had the particular grey-green color of real weather on its way. She had no coat. She had left the cabin that morning wearing what she had on, which was a work dress and a shawl that was not built for the mountains in late October. She didn't say anything about it. She wasn't the kind of person who said things about discomforts she couldn't change. But he noticed. Without speaking, somewhere around the 3rd hour of riding, he reached back and pulled a wool jacket from his saddlebag. He handed it back over his shoulder without looking at her. She took it. It smelled like wood smoke and pine resin. She put it on and felt something loosen in her chest that had been wound tight all day. Not hope exactly, but the possibility of something that wasn't dread. His cabin was another hour up the mountain. Small, well-built, the kind of structure that looked like it had grown out of the hillside, rather than been constructed on it. A woodpile along the south wall, stacked high enough to tell her he'd been preparing for winter seriously. A creek nearby that she heard before she saw it. He put the horse in the lean-to and gave it grain and water before he said another word to her. She stood in the yard and watched him work, still wearing his jacket. "There's a bedroll inside," he said when he came out. "Stove's ready to light. I'll be in directly." She went inside. The cabin was one room, a wood stove, a table, 2 chairs, a sleeping platform built into the far wall, a shelf of tools, some dried herbs hanging from a rafter. It was clean in the way of a person who had no one else to be messy for. She lit the stove the way he had described it, which was no different from lighting any other stove, and by the time he came in from the lean to the room, had begun to warm. He made a supper of beans and dried meat, and didn't offer explanation for any of it. They ate at the table, and the silence between them was the kind that sits in the room like a third person. Finally she said, "I'm Willa." He looked at her across the table. "Emmett," he said. "What do you expect from me?" she asked. "For the money." He picked up his bowl and took it to the shelf near the stove. "Work," he said, "same as I do. Nothing else." She watched him. People said a lot of things. "If that's a lie," she said, "I want to know now." He turned and looked at her fully, which was the first time she'd seen his face, straight on. His eyes were the color of creek water in shadow, grey-brown and very still. "It's not a lie," he said. She nodded. She filed that away the same way she'd filed away everything she'd decided to survive. Not believed, not disbelieved, just held. The first week was nothing but work. The weather had turned by the second morning, snow coming down steady, and there was more to do than either of them could comfortably manage. She learned the rhythm of the place, when to haul water, how he took his coffee, where the spare axe was kept, what needed checking before dark. She was not a woman who needed things explained twice. He noticed that. She could tell, the same way a person notices something they've decided not to remark on. He was quiet the way old forests are quiet, not empty, but full of things that didn't need to speak to make themselves known. She began to learn his tells, the way he stood when something was wrong with the weather, the slight shift in his shoulders when he was thinking through a problem. He was not unkind. He was just a man who had lived a long time without needing to be. And kindness had become something he expressed through action rather than language. The second week, he fell. She heard it from inside the cabin, a sharp sound, and then nothing, the nothing being somehow worse. She went out into the snow without stopping to put on her coat, and found him down by the creek, where the ice had formed at the edge and hidden itself under a thin layer of fresh powder. He'd gone out at first light to check a trap line and come down wrong on the slope. His right leg was broken below the knee. She knew it the moment she saw him try to stand and couldn't. "Don't," she said. "I can. You can't." She knelt in the snow beside him. She was thinking already. The creek was 15 feet away, the cabin another 50 yards uphill. The temperature was dropping. "I need to get you inside." What followed was not graceful. It took everything both of them had. Him on one leg and one arm. Her smaller by a full foot and 100 pounds, but stubborn in the way that people get when stubbornness is the only tool they have left. By the time they got him through the cabin door and onto the sleeping platform, she was shaking, and he had gone the grey-white color of a man in serious pain. She did what she knew how to do. She had learned some things from her mother, and her mother had been the kind of woman who learned things because there was no one else to learn them. She set the leg with 2 pieces of kindling and strips torn from a flour sack, and she did it straight, and even though his jaw was clenched so hard she could see the muscle working in his cheek, he made almost no sound. "You've done this before," he said when she'd finished. "Watched it done." she said. It was not the same thing, and they both knew it, but it was close enough, and the leg was straight, and that was what mattered. He ran a fever that night. She sat beside him and kept cold cloths on his forehead and stoked the stove every hour when it burned down, and somewhere around 3 in the morning he said something in his sleep. That wasn't any word she could make out. She watched his face in the firelight. He looked younger with his guard down. He looked like a man who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time. She understood that. The next 3 weeks were hers. The traps, the water, the wood, all of it fell to her. She went out in weather that would have kept most people inside, and she did what needed doing because the alternative was the two of them. Dying quietly in a well-built cabin on the side of a mountain, and she had not survived this far to die quietly. She found the trap line by following his notes, which were written in a small journal he kept on the shelf. She didn't read anything else in it. She only looked at what she needed, but she saw, on the inside cover, a name written in different handwriting than his. A woman's name, she thought, though she couldn't have said why, and below it a date from 8 years ago. She closed the journal. He healed, slowly. The fever broke on the 4th day. By the end of the 2nd week he was sitting up and could put some weight on it and was becoming visibly difficult to keep still, which she told him was a good sign, and he told her he didn't need it pointed out. "You're stubborn," she said. "So are you," he said. "One of us had to be," she said. Something shifted in his face, not quite a smile, but the possibility of one. She turned away before she could examine what that made her feel. December came in hard. They were snowed in for most of it, which meant weeks of close proximity in a one-room cabin, and she had expected that to be difficult in ways she was practiced at guarding against. But he kept his word the way he had said he would. He was simply himself, quiet, careful, occasionally surprising in the things he said, when he chose to say them. One evening she was mending one of his shirts by the stove side, and he was reading from one of the 3 books he owned, and without looking up from the page he said, "You're good at that." She didn't look up either. "My mother taught me." A pause. "She gone?" "Yes." Another pause. Longer. "Mine too," he said. "Long time ago." That was all, but it sat between them differently than the other silences, like something that had been opened, just slightly, and not closed. She thought about the $43 sometimes, thought about what it meant to have a price put on you, a number decided by people who owed you nothing and wanted everything. She had turned it over in her mind the way you press on a bruise, not because it feels good, but because you need to know how deep it goes. She knew the exact sum, $43. She knew because she had found it. It was in mid-January, when the cold was at its worst, and she was searching the lean-to for a spare rope and found a lockbox on the high shelf behind his winter tack. She wasn't prying. She didn't open it, but it was not fully latched, and when she reached past it for the rope, it tilted and she caught it, and the lid came open just enough for her to see what was inside. There was a small leather pouch. She could feel the coins through it without touching them. $43 or close to it, in shape and weight. She put the box back exactly as she had found it. She understood, then, something she had been trying to understand since October. He hadn't spent the money and forgotten about her. He had put it aside. He had always intended to give it back. Spring came late to the high country, the way it always did. The snow didn't break until the 1st week of April, and even then there were mornings when frost came back like a warning. But the creek ran again, and the light came back into the sky, and the world outside the cabin slowly turned from white to brown to something almost green. His leg had healed well, better than she had expected, better than he'd admitted to hoping for. He was moving without a limp by March, back to work by early April, and she was still there. She had not thought much about leaving during the winter. There was no way to leave, and she had learned not to want things she couldn't have. But now the trails were passable again. Now there was a decision to make that wasn't just abstract. She thought about her father's cabin, about Cutter's Creek, about Decker, who had taken her in payment of a debt and then lost her, and who might or might not bother coming to collect again. She had nothing to go back to. She had never had much of anything to go back to. But she was not someone who stayed where she wasn't welcome. That was the thing about being taken somewhere against your will. You learned not to assume you belonged anywhere. She found the lockbox on the workbench one morning in the second week of April. He had taken it down from the high shelf and set it there without comment. She looked at it for a moment, then looked at him. He was at the door, pulling on his coat, getting ready to go check something along the property line. Emmett. He stopped. She went to the workbench and lifted the lockbox and carried it to him and set it on the table between them. She didn't open it. She didn't say anything about what was inside. She said, "I want you to have this back." He looked at the box. He looked at earned it. He said, "Whatever was inside, it's not mine. Willa, it's not mine," she said again, steady. "I came here in debt and I've paid it. With my work, with what I did in the winter. With all of it, the ledger is even." She held his gaze. "I'm not yours because of $43. I was never yours because of $43. His face was very still, the way it got when he was thinking through something that mattered. "No," he said, "you weren't." The silence that followed was different from every other silence in that cabin. It had weight to it. The kind of weight that comes right before something changes. Permanently, she had one more thing to say, and she said it. "I'm choosing to stay or to go," she said, "on my own terms. Not because of what you paid and not because I've got nowhere else." She looked at him straight. "So I need to know, Emmett, now that the snow's gone and the trails are clear and I can leave if I want to. Do you want me here?" He didn't answer right away. He stood there with his coat half on and his hand on the door frame, and she watched something work through his face that she thought might have been the first honest expression she'd ever seen from him. Not the careful quiet, not the controlled distance, just the actual thing. "Yes," he said, "I want you here." She nodded. She picked up the lockbox and set it back on the workbench, because it belonged to him and always had. Then she went to the stove and put the kettle on, the way she did every morning, because it was morning and there was work to do. And some things you do, simply because you have decided they are yours to do. Outside the cabin, the mountain was coming back to life. The creek was running fast and cold. The spruce was shaking off the last of the winter weight. Somewhere above the tree line, where the snow still held, something was melting that had been frozen a long time. Inside, the kettle began to heat.